Have you ever tried XPresso? If you haven't, you should. And in this video, we're going to be tackling some advanced techniques and nodes to speed you up and improve your workflow in Cinema 4D. Let's do it. Hi there everybody, this is Schmidt from Greyscalegorilla.com, where we make tools, training, and tutorials to make you a better motion designer. Be sure to subscribe to catch more videos as they come out. Also, I run a live stream every week called Ask GSG, where we take questions live from the chat room, from the audience, about Cinema 4D, about cool looking projects, about things that inspire you, and we try and recreate them, answer those questions, just dive in really deep inside of Cinema 4D and try and really figure it out. So be sure to check the description to figure out where that is, how to follow it. Now in this video, we are going to be tackling XPresso. Now, if you're not familiar, XPresso is the node-based programming tool inside of Cinema 4D and allows you to link different parameters together to create controls to control more advanced things, really just build rigs to speed up your workflow. In this video, we're going to be creating a rig using the condition node, the memory node, and a whole bunch of other techniques that I've learned throughout the years that have really allowed me to build more advanced rigs. And we're going to do it from start to finish. So why don't we jump right on in? So here we are in Cinema 4D version 18. Now I did not model these chairs. I picked these up over from TurboSquid because we've got enough to deal with just dealing with the XPresso in this tutorial. I didn't want to worry about modeling and lighting and texturing a bunch of chairs. So I got this model in TurboSquid. I picked some of the chairs that I liked. I brought them into the scene. I made sure that the axis and all the axis were kind of centered on each of them, and that I retextured them using all reflectance-based materials. And I threw in an HDRI Studio just so I could see them all lit up. So they're all looking pretty good. So in this video, we're going to be doing a very, I think, practical application of the way you might do an XPresso setup. In my old job years ago, I used to have to do a bunch of corporate theater, and we would have to set up just rows and rows of seats and all these different ways of distributing them and setting them up. And we had a bunch of chairs that we'd use over and over and over again. So we want to make a rig that we can use to easily swap out to those different chairs. So you see we've got this collection of 5 different chairs, and I'm actually going to take this one, and we're not going to use it right now. We're going to save that one for something later on. And we don't have to worry about our HDRI Studio right now, so we can turn that off. So you can see that we're seeing our chairs, and we are ready to rock. So what do we want to do? Well, you'll see just for additional setup, you see I have the axis of all these chairs right at the bottom, right lined up so they all look like they sit on the ground, and the axis is centered right in the middle of them. So when I swap them out, they're going to kind of match up. So that's the starting point. You can follow along just by having some example models you have, or just even like a cube and a sphere and whatever to swap these out. But I am going to create actually I'm going to deselect everything, and I'm going to create a instance object. So you see I have a brand new empty instance. It's not even instancing anything right now. And I wanted to start instancing these different chairs. So I'm actually going to select all 4 of these chairs. I'm going to hit Alt or Option G. It's going to put them into a null. It groups them together. And I'm going to rename that sim just for symbol. This is going to be like my symbol library. And we've got all these chairs. Now I want to hide the symbol library. I want to hide that setup right there. And I'm actually going to, right now, we might not keep it this way, but right now I'm going to make it a child of the instance. So what I have here is an instance, and it's not instancing anything yet. So we could grab in one of these chairs and drag it in there, and boom, we've got the chair. Okay, cool. That seems to be working fine. And we could go and manually drag in some different chairs if we were inclined. And that's pretty much what we're going to be doing, but we're going to set that up via XPresso. So let's just go ahead and name this chair instance. And let's right-click on it, and we're going to add, actually, before we do that, why don't we add in the parameters? I'm going to go to User Data, Add User Data, and we're going to add in a very specific kind of user data. The data type is going to be an integer. So we're going to click on integer, but the integer is just like 1, 2, 3, 4. It's whole numbers. But there's a bunch of different cool interfaces if you're using integers. So now you can see we have interface and we have integer, but we also have cycle and cycle button and integer. I'm actually going to click on radio buttons. And what radio buttons is going to do is it's going to open up this data field, and we have to type things in now. So what are we going to type in? Well, I'm going to type in the different names of our chairs and some values. So I'm going to type in the first chair, but of course if we're talking like kind of code, and XPresso does it this way too, you don't start with 1, you start with 0. So we're going to type in 0, and the instructions are right here, the value, and then a semicolon. So don't hold shift or anything, just hit the semicolon button, and then type in the name of the parameter. So I'm just going to type in kitchen. So it's going to be the kitchen chair, and I hit enter, and then type in 1 semicolon. I'm going to type in the next one, which is going to be high back chair. Hit enter. 2, semicolon. And this is the comfy chair, my favorite. And we'll type in 3, semicolon. I'm going to type in the stool. So we've got that. And let's change the name of our data here. And I'm going to call it chair. Let's call it chair type, actually. So we got chair type. And right away you're going to see how the settings are going to look. We have kitchen, high back, comfy, and stool. They're all typed out right there because we did that kind of correctly. So hit OK, and now you see we have a user data, and we now have these different settings. So we can click on each of these very easily and very quickly. One other thing I want to throw out there is you see right now we're in a user data tab. That's fine, but I kind of like making a more custom tab. So here's another little tidbit for you. If you hit add group, we can click on, I don't know, let's just type in chair. So we have a group named chair. But if we take this group and we pull it out of user data and we put the chair parameter underneath it, it has now become its own tab. So now we have a chair tab, and inside there a setting for chair type. So when I hit OK, we no longer have user data. We now have chair, and we have the settings for chair. Now, of course, this isn't plugged into anything, so let's do that step next. So I'm going to right-click on our chair instance, and we're going to go to Cinema 4D tags all the way at the lonely bottom and click XPresso. So we've got our XPresso tag popped open, and we need to set up some controls here. So I'm going to make this a little bigger. And what do we need? Well, we need the setting that we're going to be getting the information from. And that setting is inside of the chair instance. So I'm going to grab the chair instance. I'm going to pull that in. And what is the setting? Well, we can get the setting 2 different ways. We can click on this red output. So we can click on that and go find the setting. So we can actually go under chair type, or I'm not going to do that, or we can click on chair and I can click directly on chair type here and I can drag it in and drop it right there on the output. And now it's also done the exact same thing, 2 different ways. So remember we typed in 0, 1, 2, 3. So that means this setting is actually outputting integers. It's outputting 0, 1, 2, 3. So what that means is we can feed that into something else. We can feed that into what is called, I think it's a condition. So I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to say new node, XPresso, logic, condition. So this is now a condition. So normally a condition is expecting true or false, or also known as 1 and 0, but instead we can feed it this integer. So now it's expecting 0, so this is 0, and 1, but we can also give it additional ones. So I'm going to say also another one, also another one. So now what this is expecting is it's being fed 0, 1, 2, 3. So these are 3 potential outputs, and whichever one corresponds with our number, it's going to output from here. Now right now this condition is outputting reals, it's going to output numbers. And we actually don't want that. We want it to be outputting objects. And how do we get to object? Well, the data type for object is called link. So if we click up here on link, second from the top, we now have the link that it's going to. So now we need to feed it the individual objects. Now we can do that in a couple different ways. We could, I guess one, and it might even be the better way, but I kind of like making it a little more explicit here. You could drag the objects directly in here, but I kind of like lining them up. So what I'm going to do is actually click on kitchen. I'm going to click on all 4 of the chair types. I'm going to click on kitchen, hold down shift, click on stool. I've got all 4. I can drag all 4 in at the same time, and now you see they're all lined up. And I'm going to pull them apart a little bit so we can just see them a little bit better. And we need to output the object because we want, what information do we want? Well, we want, what object is this? So I'm going to say output, object, output, object, output, object, output, object, and now we can very clearly see what we're feeding in here. And I'm just going to link each one to the corresponding value. So now we are feeding the condition 0, 1, 2, or 3, but now we are outputting kitchen, high back, comfy, or stool chairs. So what do we want these to feed into now? Well, we want to feed into the chair instance. So I'm going to drag down a chair instance, and what should that feed into? Well, now we're going to the input, and it should be inputting object properties reference reference object. So we can click directly on there, or of course we could have clicked on the parameter here and drag that directly there, but those are the same thing. So now I can go ahead and drag output and link it to a reference object, and we can close XPresso and we can see what we've got. So now we've got our nice little chair instance here. I can minimize that, and now we see our chair. And now I can click into our chair parameter and go boop, 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 and you see instantly we're switching to exactly that chair. So the kitchen chair, high back chair, comfy, and the stool. Working exactly perfectly, exactly the way we want it to. And now I'll show you an instance of kind of the practical application of this. I'm going to go ahead and give this file a quick save right here. I guess we can go file. I don't use it very often. I'll just say save incremental, which I think just adds a couple zeros. Okay, so we'll do that. Okay, now let's say that we need a bunch of these chairs. There are going to be a bunch of them all over the place. So let's just say it was kind of manually being done. Now, if we were to take this chair and copy and paste it, apparently I have a leather material in one of these. I didn't realize, but that's fine. What's going to happen is so now we've got 2 chairs, but let's say we want a bunch of these. We don't want to be duplicating this model a whole bunch of times. That would be getting very, very redundant. So I'm going to delete that, or actually I hit undo until it disappears. And we got a couple new materials we don't need. So I'm going to say remove unused or remove duplicate. It didn't undo enough. Okay, sorry. Okay, undid, and now I'm back to just my instance. So we don't want to be duplicating these symbols over and over again. But something that's kind of cool here is I can actually remove my symbol library from that. And now we can go ahead and kind of quickly copy and paste this chair instance again and again and again without duplicating the symbols over and over again. We get rid of that redundancy. So I've got my chair instance, and now I can say copy, and I'm even just going to go paste, 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 paste. I got a whole bunch of them, and I can grab all of them, go to coordinates, and we can type in like a little math magic, which is num times, and these chairs are about 150 wide. So I'm going to say num, which is the index of the chair, times, let's just say 200. And now it's taken each one and moved it 200 more than the one before. And we've got all these different chairs all lined up, but it hasn't duplicated the symbol library. So this is a very small scene file, and it's running pretty quick for us. Everything's working well. And what's cool is we can go and grab all these chairs, and then, the client comes in or the boss comes in and go, you know what? The client changed their mind. They want those to be kitchen chairs. And we're like, oh, okay, boom. And we click one time, and they've all updated to that other type of chair. Or let's say, maybe a little bit weirder, but let's say those 2 chairs are supposed to be high back chairs, and these are all based off the instance. So this is a really cool way of getting these laid out. So those all become individual chairs, and let's put them all on kitchen. And even on top of that, we could be like, so there's one row of chairs there, but maybe instead we're going to make a cloner. And I'm going to delete all of these except for one. And I'm going to put this into the cloner. And now we're going to clone a bunch of chairs. So I'm going to say, okay, we want a row of chairs here. So I'm going to say each chair moves over 200, and we can just make more and more duplicates. So blah, 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 blah. We got a whole nice long row of chairs. And it's like, so I'm going to copy and paste that entire cloner and chair. And this cloner is actually going to be set to a grid. And this grid of chairs is going to be 1 grid high, and we can now set per step, which is a R18 feature, I think. I can say per step should be 200 wide, and so we got X, Y, Z. So we got a Z. I'm going to say 300 on Z. So now I can move these back, and now you can see we have a cluster of chairs in the back row, and I can make this as many as I want. So I can keep on increasing this, and it's going to remember the numbers properly. And now we get that big group of chairs, or maybe there's supposed to be a few more. And now it's super easy when the client says, oh, you know what? There's supposed to be 2 rows up in the front, so we can just grab this cloner maybe and copy paste and scoot that back. And now we've got extra rows of chairs working really well. And then the client's like, oh, you know what? Those are supposed to be high back chairs, or maybe they're going to be comfy chairs. They're upgrading. So now we can click on just those 3 instances and say, okay, comfy chairs, and boom, it looks like we need a little more space on them. But now it is changed to this other type of chair. Let's change it to stool just so we have the space. So now these are all set up as a stool, kind of like tall chairs, and it was that quick, and we're getting nice, clean refresh here. Very easy scene. So right there, you see, hopefully, the usefulness of being able to do that type of setup where we're selecting these things very quickly. But let's say we want to make this rig a little bit more robust. So let's go ahead and simplify a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all these clones and just go back to our simple single chair. So now we just got the 1 chair right here. And let's say that the client says, you know what? I've got a brand new chair I want to add. We're not using any of the 4 regular ones. We've got a brand new chair. And that is going to be, and I think this is a little off. I'm going to pull it near. The new type of chair is going to be this brand new waiting room chair. So you see we get this new waiting room chair. It's like, oh, okay. That's a new type of chair. Now, maybe like, so what, there's two different things you can do. Now, if you have lots of time, what I would suggest doing is going into your user data and modifying this and adding another chair and going to your XPresso and changing the way that's set up. But that could take a while if you need to do this quickly. So instead, what we're going to do, it's going to take a while now, but once you do the setup, it'll work for every future change you'd ever need. Well, let me show you what I mean. If right now we were to go to our object and right now it's set the stool. If I were to say, you know what, like this instance, it shouldn't be a stool anymore. I'm just going to manually change it over to the waiting room chair, the brand new chair. And you'll see it immediately pops back the stool. When I say, no, waiting room chair, bink, it's being overridden by XPresso. XPresso is always saying all the time on every single refresh, no, you are telling me you should be the stool and you're going to be the stool no matter what. And if we change this instance to be the high back chair, then it is the high back chair. No matter what we drag into this object instance, it has to be the high back chair. So that's where our XPresso is now limiting us. So why don't we go and do a little bit fancier of an XPresso setup here to fix that. So we're going to go into XPresso and we want to make it that only at the time that we change this parameter does it actually update. And then after that, it frees it up for whatever we want to do with it. So we're going to use a handy setting inside of, I think, almost every single node in XPresso. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of nodes in XPresso. If we click on this input, let me make this a little bigger. If we click on this input, you will see a setting called on. So I'm going to go ahead and add an on. And what the on setting does is it's pretty much a condition. It's saying, when should I update? And right now, it's by default, it's actually set to off. So what's kind of interesting is if I were to click on our chair and I start clicking on these other ones, nothing's happening. It's not working because the condition is saying, no, you're not on, you're false. Nothing should happen. And of course, if we were to go into XPresso and click on that and say be on, then yes, now it will update. Now we can cycle through. So this is a cool condition. This is something that we can turn on and off to be able to switch these in and out. But we want to make this dynamic. We want to make this have the ability to be smart and only update when it should update. So how are we going to do that? Well, what we need to do is get a condition. We need to set up a condition that's saying if it's true or false, if it has changed, has the chair type changed. So how do we do that? Well, we are going to need a compare node. So I'm going to right click, go to new node, XPresso, and I think it's under logic. Yeah, under logic, you see a compare. And so now what we could do with this is compare. We can feed in two different objects and say if they're equal or if they're different or if it's greater or smaller, but we don't worry about that. But there's a problem with the compare node. And the problem with the compare node is we have different data types. And you see we have textures and integers, reals, and all these different things. But we don't, you'll see, we don't have a link. We don't have like the object parameter, so we can't compare object types. So we have to be a little bit more clever and think of a workaround here. We can't determine if these chairs are different based on the object type they are. Not with Python can do it, but we can't do that in XPresso. So that's not going to work. But what could we do? Well, what we could do is, you'll see here, we have a string being a text. So we could get the name of the objects and see if that changed. So I'm going to change this to a string type, and now it's expecting different strings. And now we're outputting we're outputting objects. So we actually need to output into some sort of, I guess, temporary object so we can get the name of the object. So what do I mean there? We need to just drag in whatever kind of object node we want. We can actually right-click and make a new one. That can get a little weird depending on what you have selected. Let's try it, though. I'm going to deselect everything. I'm going to right-click in nothing. I'm going to go New Node, XPresso, General, and I believe we just have an object. So this is an empty object node. But you'll see right away, even though we didn't have anything selected, it automatically was like, I need something. So it automatically input the chair instance. And you know what? That's fine. That actually doesn't have any effect on us because what we're going to do is, you saw over here, we are outputting the object. But now what we're going to do is input the object. So in the blue input, I'm going to say object. So now this is just kind of an empty object node that's expecting whatever object we feed it. So we're going to feed it this object. So now, if we're outputting kitchen's going into the condition and outputting into here. And even though this still says chair instance, which is something that's a little bit of a pain, this should actually be updating to be any object. And I wish that there was a better way of doing that where it's saying chair instance, but it's actually not the chair instance anymore. So that's actually a little frustrating. Let me see if I can show you what I mean, though. We can output the string from here. So what we're going to do is we're going to, from this chair instance, I'm going to say, what do we want? I want the basic property. And the basic property is going to be the name. So we're now outputting a string. Now let's feed that out somewhere. Where do we want that to be? I guess just for fun, why don't we rename the chair instance whatever object we're currently selected on? So I'm going to go to our input in chair instance, and I'm going to go to basic properties. I'm going to say name. So I want this name to feed into here, and let's make sure that this is turned on, and yes, it is. And you'll see already this node changed its name to Comfy. So it needed, I don't know why it took that time to refresh, and this finally updated. But now you'll see that as I click on, we can even close that temporarily, I can click over here and you'll see that this is the instance is now named Comfy. So I can click on stool and you'll see that the name is actually updating every time we click. So what that is telling us, and that's kind of cool, but what this is telling us is that this object node is now essentially an instance of whatever object we're outputting right here. So what does that mean? That means we now have a string that we're outputting in the name that we can compare. And we're going to use one of maybe the more complicated nodes, but one of my favorite. Actually, there's a whole bunch of complicated nodes, but you need some fun XPresso tutorials every once in a while. So we need to compare two things, because you can't just compare one thing. We need to compare two. So right now, if we were to output the highback name and compare it, what's it comparing to? Well, we don't know. So what we need is a nifty node, and I believe it's called, I always forget, actually, is it? Yes, it is. It is the memory node. So I'm going to right-click, new node, XPresso, general, memory. I wish it was called history, but it's called the memory node. So we click on the memory node, and you see we have a couple different settings here under parameter. Two different settings, very important. Actually, we need both node and parameter. So I'm going to click on node and then right click on parameter. And you see we have history depth and history level. So what this is doing is we can feed this pretty much any parameter and it's going to remember that parameter one refresh ago. So one update ago. So I'm going to change this memory node to be a string. This is looking for strings, okay? And we can now input the highback chair as the input, well, this object, whatever it is. So we're now inputting that into the history. Now, a weird quirk of the history node, and I'm just going to, you just have to know this, is we actually want the history level to be 1, but you'll see I cannot increase that. It's stuck at 0. And that's because a history level can only ever be 1 lower than the history depth. So what we have to do is increase history depth to 2, and now our history level can be up to 1. So all this is saying is the memory node is remembering what this object used to be. That's all it's doing. But what that means is we now have something to compare. That means if we take this memory node and put it and output the output into the compare, what we are now doing, let's order these up a little bit better. We are now comparing what the name is currently to what the name used to be. And those are different. Whenever we make a change, those two things will temporarily be different. And when they're temporarily different, the next refresh of any kind, touching an object or refreshing the viewport or framing forward anything, it'll trigger another refresh. And then suddenly they'll both be the same because it only remembered one update ago. But what that means is for one split second, for one refresh, this is a true, well, actually, right now it's saying when they're equal, be true. But what we actually want is when they're not equal to be true. So in this function, under the compare, I'm going to go function, and right now it's equal, and that means equals. We have these other ones, but we're going to go to the bottom, and we have exclamation mark equal. And in code, that means not equal. So that now we're saying when the name and the older name are not the same, that means something changed. So now we can go and grab our highback chair, or, this is our instance. This is that instance object. We can now say when something has changed, refresh. So for all purposes, and that's kind of the setup, hopefully this, I know these are some high-end concepts, but hopefully it's not too complicated. And rewatch this if you have to, because I'm making this tutorial because these are some of my favorite things to do in XPresso. Some advanced concepts, but a relatively simple setup here. So let's go ahead and close our XPresso window. And what we're going to see is it's not going to be terribly different. When I change these chairs, they are updating, and the name's even updating. So we're getting these nice refreshes here. But So, and the instant they change, the instant it updates. But what's cool now is if it's not constantly refreshing all the time, overriding it, I can now drag in whatever I want into here, and boom, it has now successfully allowed me to change this to a new type of chair, to drag in waiting room chair. I could make a cube, and I could say, you know what, you should be a cube instead. And now it's making an instance of a cube instead of the chair. So it has now allowed us that freedom. And now at any given point, I can click back into our chair type and switch back to these, and we get all these nice different chairs. But we can always drag in some new one. So I'm going to drag in the waiting room chair, and boom, it is updated to that. So let's go ahead and kind of see this in maybe a bigger, cooler action here. So let's go ahead and say the high back chair, and we've got this new waiting room chair. But let's go ahead and say, okay, the client wants us to distribute a bunch of chairs. I'm going to give you a little extra bonus trick. I love this. Let's say, we need to go do a big elaborate floor plan and we don't know where everything's supposed to be, or it's going to change. Something that's kind of cool is you can go and make just like a plane object. I'm just going to make this plane object and scale it up, and you can make it whatever size you want. For my purposes right now, this 20 by 20 is perfectly fine. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and make this editable. And I can make a MoGraph cloner, and I can feed it our chair, and I can tell it to clone onto an object. And what is that object going to be? It's going to be this plane object. And now it's going to actually clone a chair onto every single point. That's not what we want, though. We want to clone onto every single polygon center. And now we've got a line clone turned on, and for whatever reason, the transform has decided that it's going to rotate all the stuff to a weird angle. I'm not even sure why it would be doing that. Now, we have two options. One is we could go into our object and we could say, don't align the clone. I could just turn that off, and it's going to snap them all to be this nice flat kind of layout. Or we could leave it to be aligning on the clone, and we go to transform and just find the proper rotation here, which I think is going to be 180 and 90. Yeah, okay. So either one of those works, where it's just kind of laying this out in the proper direction. We've got all these chairs. But what's kind of cool about this setup is I can grab our plane, and let's go ahead and select all of our polygons. And I'm going to go select, set selection. Now we've got that selection tag, and we could even name it if we want. We can just say chairs. So now I'm going to tell our cloner, let's see if this works. We can grab our cloner, and I say, I want you to limit to this selection. So right now our selection is actually everything, so that's not actually doing much. But if we hit UL, I can maybe deselect that row, and let's get rid of this very front row right here. So now if I grab this and override my selection tag, say set selection, then boom, we have now laid out these chairs in a much more interesting, a much more controlled, interesting pattern, and it was very easy to make that change. So at any given point, if as the client comes in, they're like, oh, no, we need that front row. We don't want these two rows back behind there. So we can just double click on this tag, and I can be like, you know what? Okay, fine. They're coming back, making changes all the time. Get rid of that row. Keep this row. And let's go ahead and even if you're doing this every once in a while, or you'd want some spaces in between them, or maybe there's this middle row because you need fire exit, so we can get rid of that row. And now we can just go selection, set selection, override our chair selection tag, and boom, now we've got this new layout of chairs. And of course you can just hide this, and I would even name this plane like chair reference. So now we're getting all these chairs laid out exactly in the position we want. Very easy to change. And of course, we can go and click on our cloner. I'm sorry, not on our cloner. We can click on our high back chair, and we can say, oh, well, they changed their mind. It's supposed to be a kitchen chair. So we can go ahead and click kitchen chair, and boom, they changed that. We can change it to the comfy chair, which is a little bit cramped, but let's change it to the stool. And, there's so many cool things that you can do just kind of with these basic setups by thinking about these things kind of iteratively. And we can grab our chair reference, and maybe there's not enough space in between these, so we can go and maybe just unhide this. I'm going to select everything, hit T for scale. I'm going to scale it forward. Now you see they get a little more space in between them, and maybe they should be a little closer together this way, so I can pull them in a little tighter. There's a very easy, quick change there. Now you see they've all updated. And now, of course, the client comes in and they go, oh, wait, I've got this brand new chair model. And then you're like, dang it, I got to make this change super quick. So you don't have time to go into your XPresso, but luckily you went and made the fancier XPresso rig. So now we can just click on our stool, and I want it to reference the waiting room chair. So I can just drag that in on top of the instance, and boom, it's going to take a second because it's a little bit more complicated of a chair. But now we've instanced that chair over and over and over again, and these are all laid out. And And it was that quick to make the change. It's that set up. And we've always got our library here and all the copies of the stools wherever we need to. We can copy this one stool here. And maybe there's supposed to be an extra one right there because here's a VIP sitting right in the middle of the room, all awkward where everybody's paying attention to him. And one thing to note is, so we've got this one, the original waiting room chair kind of sitting here. We don't want to see that. But let me show you. If I were to hide that, it's going to hide all of them because we've kind of told the instance that you are instancing an invisible object. So instead, what we can do is just put this into a null. So hit Alt-G, and we can name that another symbol or symbol 2 maybe. And now we can hide that. We can hide symbol 2, and you'll see that the original one disappears, but all the other ones don't. So that's a really neat trick there. And while we're just while this stuff is working well, and I'm talking about some of the old techniques I used to use back in the day, spread these out maybe a little bit more. Something that's kind of cool is getting a little bit of variation going on here, because when everything's all super perfect like this, if you're doing some sort of render and we're setting up an auditorium and some employees went and laid out all these chairs, they're not going to be perfect and they're going to catch highlights in very identical ways. In fact, why don't we go ahead and I'm going to turn on the studio rig, and it's got a floor now and everything, but we should just get a very quick progressive render going. So we'll just let that think for a second. Hopefully so there we go. So we have this progressive render going, and it's reflecting an HDR that's in the scene. That's going to take a while to iterate through, but everything's going to be very identical. Like it's going to be catching very similar highlights. So something I kind of like doing is, now we've got this cloner set up. Now that we've got this cloner, I can go and add in a little bit of randomness. So we can go to a MoGraph Effector Random, and that's automatically applied because I had it selected. Now you see they go shooting all over the place. We don't want that. But if we go to random and we give this a little bit of variation, maybe like 5 and 5, 0 on height, because we don't want them floating up and down a little bit. And let's see how far we didn't go too far in there, so we can probably go a little further. Let's say 10 and 10. So you see there's a little bit of variation there. They're not perfectly lined up. And then the best, of course, is adding in a little bit of rotation. So we can turn on rotation. Now you got to go with a light touch here. I'm going to do 5 degrees, and that will probably be too high. So I'm going to say 5 on H, and you see that it's not too bad. So you see all of these have a little bit of rotation, just a little bit to make it not quite so perfect. I think 3 tends to be a good number there, where you can kind of feel a little bit of a difference, but they don't stand out too much. And then something I've done, when I had the job, I could turn on like a checkbox and put an instance of a person in all of them. And that could even be a separate cloner. And then I would like add scale variation on there. And I tended to use like a silhouette. A silhouette is a lot easier. Actually, here's a little separate hint. But when I'd be showing clients renders, a weird paradox is the more photorealistic it is, the more that they're very, very, very picky. They'd be like, no. Like I want a little, like the color is a little off, or this isn't there, or I want there to be more women in the audience, or I want there to be more, or can they all be wearing suits, or can they all be wearing hats or whatever. They get very specific if it gets very realistic. But what I would always do with my crowd is I would essentially just put a black material on the model. So it would turn into a silhouette, and it would just be silhouettes of people sitting in chairs. And maybe if you want to get fancy, you could put like a specular highlight or something. So there's just like a little bit of highlight on the top of the head and on the shoulders. And as soon as you kind of abstract it like that, as soon as the clients saw, it was just like, oh, it's just kind of an abstracted, artsy kind of audience. They would never ask for the changes on that. So by abstracting things a little bit, I always found the clients were more willing to go along with it than when you go very literal, when you show them exactly what it's going to be, then they're like, oh, I want to make these very exact changes. So anyway, this is rendered for a little bit. And you can see we have that little bit of variation going on here. And what's cool about that is we start getting slightly varied highlights. So you see like right here, we get like a pretty, we get a highlight popping out more than on the side, the ones next to it. It's just that little bit of variation, a little bit of not quite so perfect. And you can see like when you look down this line, it doesn't quite seem as lined up and perfect. I don't know if you guys ever do this kind of thing, but when I'm reading like comics or even like web comics, do you ever see where there's like one panel and then another panel and the two of them look like they're identical? It's like, oh, those look identical. I wonder if the artist copy and pasted the image and just used the same one twice, which is, well, I mean, it's a good thing to do, but it's also kind of feels like cheating. So in that same way, and I always go and look and try and see if I can find the most micro detail and see if it's the same in all of them. So what's kind of cool about what we just did with this is by rotating these a little bit, if somebody's paying super attention and they take a look and they look, it's like, oh wait, these aren't all perfectly lined up. And it feels less that we just took it and mathematically said, be in a perfect line. It's like, oh, like maybe these were hand placed, and it just feels like there's more effort, more variation, more life, because life isn't perfect lines and rows. So I definitely like doing that kind of thing. We're not going to do it in this video, but you could also add in like a variation shader into here or a MoGraph color shader, and we could actually have slight color variations on every single chair as well. But this isn't about that. This is more about the XPresso that we are setting up here. So yeah, so we've got our symbol library. So yeah, in the scene, what I might do is save a scene file, and the only thing that would be in the scene file would be this chair and the symbols for it. So I'm going to save that just to keep it. But we can grab this stool and the symbol library, copy, open up a new file, paste. Don't worry about the leather because that's not a thing. And oh, we're doing an instance of the other chair. So now all we have to do is tell the stool, I think. Yeah, to be any one of these. So what I would probably do is grab the stool and then zero this out, and then grab our symbol library, maybe unhide it, and then I'd even grab all of these and zero them out. So you can say 0, 0, and actually I'm going to go into these coordinates and say 0, 0, and they're all going to boom pop in the exact same spot and overlap. Maybe even this symbol library that can get shrunk down, and now I can hide it again. So now we can save this as a standalone file and just merge this into the file, or you can save it in a certain spot and get it to it from your content browser, and you just go and grab it and then drag it into your scene file, and now you're ready to use your symbol library and copy and duplicate and make as many of these as you need to, and you have all of your XPresso functionality to change them to whatever type of chair that you want. So yeah, I think that will wrap up this one. It's kind of fun. I don't get to talk about XPresso too much, and I intentionally did this video because I wanted to talk about some of those more advanced topics in XPresso. Like, and then you see very clean setup here, but we got to learn about the condition node, and we got to learn about the memory node, and we got to learn about on being a condition of when it should trigger. And we even, did a little bit of this object stuff and talked about some of the quirks with that. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. I actually had a lot of fun doing it. I didn't think it would end up being quite this elaborate, but it's really neat seeing these kind of setups where you see all these things arrayed. It starts looking pretty cool. It's like you get a lot of output for very little work. So that will wrap up this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in another tutorial. Bye-bye. So there we go. Hopefully you've seen where XPresso can be useful for you and how you can apply it to your own world if you already knew XPresso. Maybe you've learned some more advanced techniques and tricks to make your rigs even more advanced, even more useful, speed things up even more. If you found the video useful, hit like. And of course, if you want to follow more of our videos, hit subscribe so you can catch everything right as it comes out. Like I mentioned earlier, I do a live stream every week called Ask GSG. Check the description so you can follow that and come in and ask your own questions. We can really dive in, try and figure those things out. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in another tutorial. Thanks. Bye. Have you ever techniques and some nodes inside of Cinema 4D? Now in this video, we're going to be Now in this video, advanced blah blah blahs. Have you ever tried